Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a really serious question. What happens when the actions of a U.S. president seem to line up perfectly with the interests of an adversary like Russia? And our whole story kicks off with one single, incredibly powerful ultimatum.
So let's start with this projected quote from a hypothetical February 2025. It just sets a dramatic stage, doesn't it? I mean, this is a moment of absolutely immense pressure on a wartime leader. And it forces us to ask, what does this actually mean for Ukraine, for the U.S., and really for the entire world order?
And this kind of pressure, it's way more than just a simple policy debate. It takes us right to one of the most serious questions you can possibly ask about a national leader.
So this gets us to the absolute heart of the matter. The source material really puts it bluntly. Do these actions effectively mean a U.S. president is acting on Russia's behalf? Now, to even begin to answer that, we have to understand the incredibly high legal standard for what that phrase, acting on behalf, actually means.
Okay, so under international law, proving someone is acting on behalf of a foreign power isn't just a matter of opinion. It requires hard, cold evidence that someone is acting on direct instructions or under the control of another country. And that, as you can see, sets an extremely high bar for proof. It's a critical piece of context to keep in mind as we look at the events next.
All right, so keeping that really high legal bar in mind, let's walk through the pattern of events that the analysis lays out for 2025.
What the analysis shows is this incredibly fast, almost breakneck series of events. It kicks off with that ultimatum we saw. And then, almost immediately, military aid to Ukraine is halted. That pressure is then used to push a ceasefire, and the whole thing builds towards a proposed summit between the U.S. and Russia to talk about territorial swaps. The key thing here is just the speed and the relentless nature of this pressure campaign.
Now, this is where things get really interesting. The analysis points out how this all kind of rhymes with the 2019 impeachment scandal. Remember that? Back then, the pressure was all about a personal political goal. But in this 2025 scenario, the pressure is for a stated policy goal, getting a peace deal. The stated reasons are different.
But here's the kicker. Even though the goals are different on the surface, the method, as the analysis points out, is almost identical. In both situations, the common thread is using leverage, using crucial American aid as a weapon to force Ukraine's hand, and in doing so, chipping away at its sovereignty.
So we've seen the pressure campaign, but how does this all stack up against what Russia actually wants? This is where the analysis really starts to connect the dots between these U.S. actions and the Kremlin's own strategic goals.
This table, which comes straight from the analysis, is pretty eye-opening. It lays it all out, side by side. You see a Kremlin goal, like cementing control over land it's occupied, and right next to it, a U.S. action, pushing a ceasefire that would do exactly that. Or another Russian goal, weaken Ukraine's ability to fight, and the U.S. action, pausing military aid. The abrupt policy changes also create what the sources call whiplash among allies, which, guess what, is another key Russian objective.
And that really brings us to the bottom line of the analysis. The conclusion is that whether it's by design or just by effect, all of these steps push things toward the outcome that Moscow wants most, a deal made under pressure that essentially freezes Russia's gains on the ground.
Which leaves us to the final verdict, right? The big conclusion from all this. And it really comes down to this critical difference between someone's intent and the actual effect of their actions.
So, remember that super high legal bar we talked about at the beginning? Well, the analysis is clear. There's no smoking gun, no direct proof of anyone taking orders. But, and this is a huge but, the cumulative effect of all these policies, it's undeniably, demonstrably beneficial to Russia's position in this war.
In fact, there's a quote from the source material that just sums this up perfectly. It says, "Whether one judges this as acting on Russia's behalf hinges on intent. The effects, however, are unmistakably Kremlin-friendly."
Okay, so you might be thinking, intent versus effect, what's the big deal? Well, why does this distinction actually matter? What are the ripple effects of all this for the rest of the world?
The analysis points to three huge risks here. First, there's the strategic one. You're setting a really dangerous precedent that aggression might just pay off. Second, it's a huge problem for international law, because a deal that's forced on someone isn't really legitimate. And finally, there's a domestic legal risk right here in the U.S. Withholding money that Congress has already approved could violate the Impoundment Control Act,
the very same law that was at the heart of the 2019 scandal.
And so, when you boil it all down, this whole explainer leaves us wrestling with a really fundamental question. In world affairs, when we're judging the actions of our leaders, what's more important, what they say they intend to do, or the actual real-world effect of their policies? There's just no easy answer to that one.